Get out of my hotel. You think people like you belong in a place like this? You're an embarrassment. Security. Get him out of here. Now." Those words were spoken in the lobby of the Caldwell Grand in downtown Halifax on a Thursday afternoon in October. The man on the receiving end of them didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the hotel manager, a man named Ronald Briggs, and said very quietly, "I understand." Then he picked up his worn leather satchel, turned around, and walked out through the revolving doors into the cold Atlantic rain. His name was Nathaniel Okafor. And if you think this story ends there, stay with us. Because what happened in that hotel lobby, and what happened exactly 22 hours later, is the kind of thing that makes you rethink every assumption you've ever made about what power looks like. If this is your first time here at Heirloom Tales, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and stay a while. We tell the stories that remind you why character always outlasts arrogance. And this one is something else. Nathaniel Okafor was 51 years old. He had grown up in a two-bedroom apartment in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. The second of 4 children born to Emmanuel and Grace Okafor, who had emigrated from Lagos in 1968 with 2 suitcases and a determination that their children would never know what it felt like to have nothing. Emmanuel drove a cab for 20 years. Grace cleaned offices downtown, the same downtown where her son would one day own property, 5 nights a week, coming home just before the kids woke up for school, still in her uniform, smelling of industrial bleach and something warmer underneath it that Nathaniel could never quite name. Love, maybe. Resolve. Nathaniel watched his parents work. That was the education that mattered most. Not Dalhousie, where he eventually earned a commerce degree, and not the MBA he finished at night while working days at a commercial property firm. What shaped him was watching tie her shoes at 10 p.m. and not complain. What shaped him was his father counting tips at the kitchen table and still, somehow, putting money aside. By the time Nathaniel was 34, he had purchased his first investment property. A 6-unit building in Dartmouth, 1 block from where he'd grown up. By 40, he had a portfolio of 17 properties across Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. By 48, he had quietly become one of the most significant private commercial real estate holders in Atlantic Canada. He didn't advertise this. He drove a modest car, a dark blue Subaru with 180,000 kilometers on it that he refused to replace because it still ran fine. He wore clothes that were clean and neat but unremarkable. He lived in a house in Bedford that was comfortable but not ostentatious. His accountant once told him he could afford to live 10 times more extravagantly, and Nathaniel had laughed and said, "I know. That's not the point." The point, he had always believed, was the work. The next deal. The next building that needed rescuing. The quiet, steady accumulation of something real. Which is why, on that Thursday in October, he was walking into the Caldwell Grand wearing dark slacks, a gray cable-knit sweater, and a jacket that had seen better days. Because he had come straight from a site visit to a property in Dartmouth, where 2 of the roof panels needed urgent attention, and he hadn't gone home to change. He was scheduled to meet with an architect named Vivian Tran at the Caldwell Grand's business lounge at 3:30. The Caldwell Grand was one of the properties he was in the middle of acquiring. The deal was not yet public. It was not yet signed. But it was, as of that morning, essentially done. He walked through the revolving doors at 3:22 p.m. Ronald Briggs had managed the Caldwell Grand for 11 years. He was the kind of man who had held a position of local authority long enough to confuse it with personal power. He kept his hair precisely parted. He wore his suit like a costume. He spoke to the hotel's housekeeping staff in a tone he would never have used in front of guests. And he spoke to guests in a tone calibrated entirely by how they appeared the moment they walked in. He was standing near the front desk when Nathaniel came through the doors. What he saw was a middle-aged black man in a worn jacket carrying a leather satchel, looking, in Briggs's estimation, entirely out of place. He didn't wait. That was the thing that the lobby's security camera would later capture so clearly. He didn't wait to see if Nathaniel walked toward the desk or the elevator or the business lounge. He crossed the marble floor immediately, putting himself directly in Nathaniel's path. "Excuse me." His voice was sharp. "Can I help you?" Nathaniel looked up. He had dealt with this kind of thing before. The assessment in the eyes, the slight shift in posture, the question that wasn't really a question. He'd dealt with it his whole life. "I'm here for a meeting," he said. "Business lounge, 3rd floor." Briggs looked him up and down. "With who?" "Vivienne Tran. She's an architect. We have a 3:30. Briggs's expression didn't soften. "I'm going to need you to wait here while I verify that." Nathaniel nodded. Of course. The verification, apparently, took the shape of Briggs pulling aside a young front desk clerk named Amara Siddiqui and whispering something to her while keeping his eyes on Nathaniel. Amara glanced over, looked uncomfortable, and typed something into her computer. Whatever she told Briggs, he didn't like it. Or maybe he didn't believe it. Or maybe. And this is what the camera seemed to suggest. He had already decided how this was going to go. He came back. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Nathaniel was still. "I'm sorry?" "The business lounge is for registered guests and confirmed appointments only." "I can't verify your appointment. She's booked under Vivienne Tran. You can call the 3rd floor directly." "Sir." Briggs's voice had dropped into something colder. "I'm asking you to leave. This is a private establishment, and I have the right to refuse entry." There were people in the lobby. A couple checking in, a man in a business suit waiting by the elevator, a porter with a luggage cart, 2 women sitting in the lounge chairs near the window, lowering their voices. Everyone saw. Most of them looked away. Nathaniel took a slow breath. "I'm not going to cause any trouble," he said. "I'm simply asking you to make one phone call." And that's when Briggs made the decision that would define the rest of his career. He raised his voice. "Get out of my hotel." The lobby went completely silent. "You think people like you belong in a place like this?" Briggs's face had gone red. The performance of authority had tipped into something uglier. "You're an embarrassment. Security, get him out of here. Now." A security guard, a young man named Kyle, who looked like he genuinely did not want to be doing this, appeared from near the side corridor. He was bigger than Nathaniel, and he took his position seriously, stepping between Nathaniel and the rest of the lobby, as though Nathaniel were a threat rather than a man standing very calmly with a leather satchel. Nathaniel looked at Kyle. Then he looked at Briggs. Then he looked around the lobby, at the couple by the desk, at the man in the suit, at the 2 women near the window, at Amara behind the counter, who was staring at her screen so hard it must have hurt. He didn't say anything else. He picked up his satchel. He walked to the revolving doors. He pushed through them into the rain. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, water beating on his jacket, and called Vivienne Tran. "I'm outside," he said. "They wouldn't let me in. Can you come down?" She came down in 4 minutes. She stood in the lobby doorway, held it open, and looked at him with an expression he recognized. The particular exhaustion of a person who has seen this happen to someone they know too many times. "Nathaniel," she said. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," he said. "Let's reschedule. Come to my office Monday. Bring the revised drawings." He paused. "Bring the full set. We have a lot to go over." She nodded. She understood what he meant. They rescheduled. He walked back to his Subaru in the rain. He didn't tell anyone about it that night. He went home, changed out of the wet jacket, made himself a bowl of egusi soup from the batch Grace had sent with him from her last visit, and sat at his kitchen table with a set of acquisition documents and a red pen. The Caldwell Grand had been operating at a 34% occupancy rate for the last 6 quarters. Its previous ownership group, a Toronto-based hospitality investment firm called Mercer Halstead Group, had been trying to offload it quietly for 8 months. The property itself was excellent. Prime Halifax waterfront, heritage designation, 112 rooms, original terrazzo floors, and coffered ceilings that would cost a fortune to replicate. The problem was management. The problem was that the building had been run, for years, by someone who had confused his own small authority with the identity of the place itself. Nathaniel had been watching this building for a long time. He signed the documents that night. Both copies. He called his lawyer, a woman named Theodora Kamani, just before 10. "Is it done?" she asked. "It's done," he said. "We close tomorrow morning." 9 o'clock, I'll be there, she said. There was a pause. He almost told her what had happened in the lobby. Instead he said, "Get some sleep. You too, she said. He didn't sleep much, but not because of Ronald Briggs. Theodora Kimimani was dressed in charcoal gray when she walked into the Caldwell Grand the next morning at 8:47 with 2 associates and a leather portfolio that was worth more than most people's cars. She walked to the front desk and asked for the general manager. The front desk clerk, the same young woman, Amara Siddiqui, who had been on shift the previous afternoon, recognized the name of the firm on Theodora's business card, and her expression shifted into something careful and professional. "I'll let him know you're here," she said. Ronald Briggs appeared 8 minutes later, straightening his jacket, extending his hand. "Mrs. Kamani, welcome. We've been expecting your team. Shall we go up to the boardroom?" "Yes," said Theodora pleasantly. "We'll need all senior management present. And please make sure HR has someone available." He didn't ask why. People who have worked in large institutions long enough develop a sensitivity to the texture of certain requests. Something in the way she said it, all senior management, HR available, registered somewhere behind his eyes, but he dismissed it. It was a closing. Formalities. Papers to be signed. Nathaniel arrived at 9:03. A white shirt, no tie, the same leather satchel. His shoes were polished. His bearing was exactly what it had always been. Unhurried, quiet, present. He walked through the revolving doors. He crossed the marble floor toward the elevator. He did not look around for Ronald Briggs. Ronald Briggs, however, saw him. He had been standing near the front desk, walking Theodora's associates toward the elevator, when the doors revolved, and Nathaniel came through. He registered the suit. He registered the satchel. Something in his face went slightly uncertain. Nathaniel stepped into the elevator without acknowledging him. The boardroom on the 4th floor had windows that looked out over the harbor. The morning light was coming in gray and clean, the kind of Halifax morning that made the city look like itself. Serious, beautiful, not interested in impressing anyone. Nathaniel sat at the head of the table. He set the satchel down. He opened it and removed the signed documents and placed them in a neat stack in front of him. Theodora introduced him. She did it simply, the way you introduce someone when the introduction is largely a formality. "This is Nathaniel Okafor," she said. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, he is the new owner of the Caldwell Grand." The room was quiet for a moment. There were 4 people from the Mercer-Halstead side, including their lead counsel. There was a woman from the hotel's finance department named Carol Ann Belanger, who nodded with the careful neutrality of someone who has learned to always nod carefully. There was Kyle from security, who had been asked to attend as a courtesy witness, and who was sitting very still. And there was Ronald Briggs. Nathaniel looked at the documents. He didn't look at Briggs yet. He picked up a pen, reviewed the final page, and signed. He slid the documents to Theodora. She countersigned. She passed them to the Mercer-Halstead counsel, who reviewed them, initialed the appropriate sections, and nodded. "Congratulations," the counsel said to Nathaniel. "It's a beautiful property." "It is," Nathaniel agreed. "It has good bones." Then he looked up, and for the first time since walking into the boardroom, he looked directly at Ronald Briggs. Briggs had gone pale. Not dramatically, not the way people go pale in films, with a sharp intake of breath and a hand to the chest. It was quieter than that. It was the slow draining of color from a face that has suddenly understood something it cannot undo. Nathaniel studied him for a moment. He didn't smile. He didn't narrow his eyes. His expression was the same expression he'd had in the lobby the day before. Measured, clear, unhurried. "Mr. Briggs," he said, "I'd like to speak with you privately after we adjourn. You and HR." Briggs nodded. He didn't speak. Kyle, from his chair near the window, was staring at the harbor. The private meeting lasted 40 minutes. Nathaniel didn't shout. Nathaniel had never needed to shout. He had the recordings. The lobby had 4 cameras. And he had 3 witness accounts, including Amara Siddiqui's, who had come forward that morning before the closing with a written statement that she had wanted to make for some time. She'd described the pattern, the assumptions, the way Ronald Briggs ran the front desk, like it was a door policy at a club he personally owned. He let Briggs speak. Briggs attempted, briefly, an explanation. Something about protocol, security concerns, a misunderstanding, and then stopped. because there was no version of the explanation that held up against what was recorded, against what Amara had written down, against the fact that Nathaniel Okafor was sitting across from him in a suit, in a hotel that now bore his signature on the deed. At some point during the meeting, Ronald Briggs's face did something complicated, something that went past embarrassment, past professional humiliation, something that looked from the outside like a man confronting the gap between the story he'd told himself for years, about his own judgment, his own instincts, his own authority, and the reality of who he actually was. He didn't cry, but he came close. That much was visible. Nathaniel watched him. He didn't look away. He let the silence sit. Then he said, "I don't need you to apologize to me, Mr. Briggs. An apology to me is the smallest part of this." He slid a piece of paper across the table. "These are the members of your staff who filed informal complaints over the last 3 years that were never acted on. Amara Siddiqui is one of them. There are 7 others." Briggs looked at the list. "What happened to me in this lobby yesterday was a version of something that's been happening here for a long time," Nathaniel said. "To people who work here. To guests who didn't look the way you decided they should look. I've spoken with HR. I've reviewed the files. This isn't a new pattern. It's a very old one." He picked up his pen. He set it down again. "Your employment here is terminated effective today. HR will provide you with the relevant documentation and discuss your options with you after I leave." He stood. He picked up his satchel. "I want this building to be somewhere people are welcomed," he said. "All people. That's not a complicated standard. It's actually the minimum." He left the room. In the weeks that followed, Nathaniel made Amara Siddiqui the interim front desk supervisor, a role she had been quietly performing the functions of for 2 years without the title or the pay. He hired a hospitality consultant named Josephine Arsenault to review the hotel's culture from the ground up. He replaced the policy manual, a document that had been largely unchanged since 2009, with something that was both clearer and more human. He also had the lobby repainted. The original color had been a shade of beige that was neither warm nor cool, just absent. He chose a deep, warm terracotta that made the terrazzo floors look the way they were meant to look. Kyle, the security guard, submitted a written request for a meeting with Nathaniel 2 weeks after the closing. Nathaniel accepted. Kyle came in on his day off, in his own clothes, and told Nathaniel that he had felt wrong about what happened the day before the closing, and that he had gone home that night and not been able to sleep. "I should have said something," Kyle said. Nathaniel looked at him for a moment. "Yes," he said. "You should have. But you're here now." Kyle became one of the longest-serving employees under the new ownership. He worked at that hotel for another 11 years. He developed, over time, an uncanny ability to make people feel welcome the moment they walked through the revolving doors. All people, regardless of what they were wearing, regardless of what they were carrying, regardless of what assumptions a quick glance might tempt someone to make. He talked about that Thursday in October sometimes, on slow mornings when the lobby was quiet and there was a new staff member learning the front. He talked about the man in the worn jacket and the leather satchel, about standing in the lobby and watching someone be told they didn't belong somewhere, and not saying anything, about how that stayed with you, about how it should. Nathaniel Okafor kept the Caldwell Grand for 9 years before selling it to a hospitality group out of Montreal at a number that more than validated the acquisition. Before the sale closed, he walked through the building one last time, alone, on a Sunday morning. He went through every floor. He stood in the lobby for a long time, looking at the terracotta walls, the terrazzo floors, the harbor light coming through the windows. He thought about his mother tying her shoes at 10 o'clock at night, his father counting tips at the kitchen table. He thought about a Thursday afternoon in October, standing in the rain on a Halifax sidewalk, calling an architect. He thought about what it meant to walk into a room and not be seen for what you were, and what it meant, the rarer thing, the harder thing, to walk into a room and choose to see everyone else clearly anyway. He took the elevator down to the lobby. He nodded to the woman at the front desk, who smiled and said good morning. And he said good morning back. Then he pushed through the revolving doors into the cold Atlantic air, and walked to his car and drove home. Because sometimes the man they tried to throw out of the building is the one who decides what the building becomes.